Now, the big picture understanding of energy metabolism is that we've got these chemical energy in the bonds of carbon-hydrogen bonds of our energy-yielding nutrients, our carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So we're going to be going through those processes, and we're going to split apart that carbon-hydrogen bond. We're going to capture it on our ATP, and then we can spend our ATP. So here's an overview, what we're going to go through. I've got a list of terms over here, the things that you should be able to identify those terms and see where they're fitting in. And we know that whatever the energy-yielding nutrient is, they all go through three basic processes. The first one is going to be just the conversion to acetyl-CoA. So this is the basic process number one, basic process. And that is the conversion of the energy-yielding nutrients to acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA is a 2-carbon molecule, and we're going to go through specifically how they get there. But just know that every one of the energy-yielding nutrients can get there, and that this is considered the center of energy metabolism. Now, once we get there, once we have a 2-carbon molecule, we're going to attach it to a 4-carbon molecule that's just in the body, and we end up with a 6-carbon molecule. And we're going to send it through what is called the Tca cycle. Some people call it the citric acid cycle, because that's what that 6-carbon molecule is, and other people call it the Krebs cycle because Krebs was the guy who understood this. And so what will happen, we're going to take one of those carbons and then a second one of those carbons. We'll add oxygen to it, and we will then get carbon dioxide. Now look what happens. We end back up with a 4-carbon, and we can add another 2-carbon and send it around those pathways again. So that's why they call it a cycle. If we think that we have that carbon-hydrogen bond that we split apart to get the energy out of it, we know what happened to the carbon, but we have to think about what happens to the hydrogen. Hydrogen, we're going to throw that off in this system as well, but instead of just adding oxygen right here, we're going to pick that up with these special carrier molecules. So here's a couple of those terms that we have listed over here. NAD and FAD are going to be molecules that pick up this hydrogen. Hydrogen's electron, energized, and we're going to bring it through what is known as the electron transport chain. So now we've had 3 processes. We've got basic process is to get to acetyl-CoA. The second process here is what we call the Tca cycle. And that third basic process is going to be the electron transport chain. So we're bringing hydrogen down through this series of pathways. And in the end, we're going to end up with water. We finally get that oxygen on there and a bunch of ATP. So our end products of energy metabolism are going to be carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. So that's the 3 basic processes that all energy-yielding nutrients go through. But let's back it up and take a look at each one of them and how they get through these pathways. I'm going to erase this to get a little bit more space here. So what we have, we'll start with glucose, and it's always important to kind of start with the number of carbons in that molecule. So glucose is a 6-carbon molecule, and we're going to bring it to acetyl-CoA in multiple steps. Each one of these is multiple steps, but we've summarized it here. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to convert this to pyruvate. Pyruvate is a 3-carbon molecule. So essentially, we're going to take that glucose, split it in half. We end up with 2-pyruvate. I'm not going to make a note of that, but I want you to realize that there are actually 2-pyruvate. This process of going from glucose to pyruvate has a term. It's called glycolysis. And well, that's another one of our terms that we have listed here. And knowing that that is just lysis, the breaking apart of glucose. It's kind of an important part in our body for one reason, and we're going to draw a little line here, because to go from glucose to pyruvate doesn't require any oxygen. And this is a pathway that is anaerobic, meaning it requires no oxygen. It produces a little bit of ATP, about 2, not very many, and it is our pathway that will be important when we talk about exercise. But right now, just the concept of not needing oxygen, and then right below that is an aerobic pathway. So this is a pathway that will need oxygen. So here's 2 more terms, knowing the difference between them. Aerobic meaning it requires oxygen to have that pathway, anaerobic not. And this is the only one. Glycolysis is an anaerobic pathway. So here's where we're going to need oxygen, and we're going to take one of these carbons in this pyruvate, we're going to add oxygen to it, And now we end up with a carbon dioxide there as well, and we end up with our 2 carbon molecules. So we got to our first basic process. So if we come over to protein, we'll add protein to this. And protein is going to be protein from our foods. Of course, it could be the eggs that you had for breakfast or chicken you had last night for dinner. But it also could be protein in your body that you're breaking down and using for energy. And we know that we don't actually use proteins directly. We're going to use and convert those to amino acids, those building blocks of proteins. And there's a piece of amino acid that contains nitrogen that we're going to have to clip off. So we're going to clip off that nitrogen. And if you recall from the protein lectures, that is a process called deamination. We're going to deaminate that, clip off that nitrogen and pull that off the amino acids. We're going to convert that to urea, and that's going to go out into our urine. And it is the part of our urine. If you wake up in the morning a little dehydrated, your urine will be a yellow color and it might smell of ammonia. That's where it's coming from. But if we look at that basic amino acid molecule, we still have a big section of it that's carbohydrate based. That carbon-hydrogen bond is there. So what we're going to do is that we're going to take it and convert it, and again, we've got to get it over here to acetyl-CoA. Now there are 20 different amino acids, and every one of them has their own set of pathways, but we can put some general guidelines of what's going on here. About half of them, I'm going to erase this to get a little bit more space again. We'll take away these words. We know that those terms are where they relate to. Get to put amino acids into this pathways. So some of those amino acids will actually be converted to pyruvate, about 50% of them. And then the remainder of them will be converted directly to acetyl-CoA, and some of them actually can be converted right into that Tca cycle. And this is about 50% of them. That's going to be important when we talk about feasting and fasting. So we can see what happens though. We get these over here, they get to acetyl-CoA, and they're ready for that second process of the Tca cycle. Let's go over to the triglycerides. So triglycerides is going to be a molecule that has the glycerol backbone, 3 carbon backbone, and then it has 3 fatty acids that are linked off it. So we'll abbreviate that Fa. And these we're going to rip apart and take them through the pathways in separate ways. Glycerol, 3 carbon. So once we separate these, the glycerol is going to be converted to pyruvate, and then it will get down into the Tca cycle. But these fatty acids are going to go directly to acetyl-CoA. And if you think back on fatty acid, what makes fatty acid, some of the characteristics, one of the things is that they are an even number of carbons. And the reason why they're even number of carbons is because they're made with acetyl-CoA, 2 carbons at a time. But we're breaking this down, and we're going to break it through a process called beta oxidation. So here's another one of our words here thinking about. So beta is the second letter of the Greek alphabet, and that's why. It's because we're going to clip off 2 carbons at a time of these fatty acids and convert it to acetyl-CoA, and now we're ready for that Tca cycle and through the electron transport chain. So we've got our energy-yielding nutrients, we've got our protein, our glucose, and our triglycerides. We can see that they all eventually get to the center of energy metabolism, acetyl-CoA, and now they go through that Tca cycle through the electron transport chain, and we end up with carbon dioxide, water, and ATP as our end products.